Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight in 15. This is a moment when Accenture takes 15 precious minutes to take you on a deep dive into a hot topic in business today. I'm your host, Jill Kramer, and today I'm going to be spending some time with my colleagues in Accenture Song, Mark Curtis and Katie Burke. Both of you, welcome to Foresight in 15.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Today, we're going to dive into a conversation that comes up every year around a very important piece of research that we do. And it's research that really helps our clients get closer to their customers. Of course, I'm talking about Accenture Life Trends. And the whole idea of this piece is to not skate up high over the things that are really changing behaviors in the world, but dive down deep and seek to understand them more deeply. And the whole reason for that is so that our clients can understand the communities and the culture in which they have to succeed and figure out ways to make those important and relevant connections with their customers. So for our live audience, just a reminder in advance, we do take your questions live. So please put them into the app and they will send them my way as we go. And in the meantime, I'm going to dive in with Mark and with Katie around our Accenture Life Trends. All right, Mark, let's start with you just to remind the audience on what is different about Accenture Life Trends as a piece of research.
Yeah, so we start by asking our Accenture Songs global network of designers, creatives, technologists, anthropologists, who we have across actually over 50 design studios and creative agencies, to look out for signals in their locality and to send us their signals, which we then synthesize and discuss them with academics, and then we shape them into 5 trends. And then we do, to validate what we've heard, the pattern recognition, external in-depth interviews with people in 8 countries where they tell us whether and how the trends are manifesting in their own words, which is very important. And then lastly, we combine these insights with a big online survey of almost 25,000 people across 22 markets to shape the final trends, which we then publish.
I love how it starts so in such a small kind of personal group, and we just keep kind of engaging outward from there. Thank you, Mark, to remind us of that methodology. Katie, you get to unveil the trends for us for this particular broadcast. There are 5. Would you take us through them?
Sure. In brief, our 5 trends start out with what we call is an anchor trend for us. It's called the cost of hesitations. And at the center of this trend is people's new hesitation reflex when they're navigating their digital lives, whether it's the channels that they're in, WhatsApp, any of these types of places where communication comes in. But it's socials, it's search, it's all these places. And so they're being more vigilant, asking more and more questions each time as, am I safe? Am I in control? And is this real? And so that's the big anchor of that first trend. The second we have is the parent trap, which I think a lot of people will find themselves familiar with. But this is just the very fast moving groundswell of collective action of parents, educators, and legislators looking at how the smartphones impact on the younger generation and the long-term impacts on mental health and actually mindsets and behaviors are being shaped, and they're course correcting certain things with either new rules, new legislation, and actually just more social action overall. So we're watching this pretty closely, mainly because we do think that this has a lot of impact for businesses as they are part of the ecosystem of this nature of smartphone activity and devices and how they get in front of the next generation. The third trend we have is called the impatience economy. And this is where the immediacy of modern life has kind of been pushing impatience for a while. And we've been seeing that. But people are more impatient, but they're more impatient about achieving their big life goals, the things like health, the things like their wealth, and things like how they're finding happiness day to day. And they're using the power of the crowd to help navigate them on these big life goals. And that's what's so different about this trend, is that we're not looking at influencers just for the day-to-day shopping recommendations or recipe recommendations, or however you use influencers, right? But it's moved up in importance, and it's taking kind of, it's taking eyes away from trusted institutions where they should be going to first in a lot of places. And that's why it's important for our clients overall. And then the fourth one we have is called the dignity of work. And I know that this is a topic across maybe the enterprise more so than consumers, but we are watching this sentiment of organizations and how they're dealing with the transactional nature of work more and more. And there's a lot of factors that play into this, and the trend will uncover, a few things like, the continued impact of the pandemic or just the way that the economic factors are impacting organizations. But we do see this as a huge leadership challenge. It's a right now leadership challenge of how do you lead today in a hard economic environment. And then finally, we get into social rewilding. And this is actually one of the biggest trends we heard in signals from across the world, different versions, different localities. But we did hear that people are actually, trying to find simplicity and texture in their lives. And they're putting the phone down for some of the big important things like community, connection, friendship, and love. And they're exploring that in the real world. And the texture and the slow journey around that is really what's kind of coming to life through all of the research that we saw. So those are our 5 trends, Jill. And they're really fun to get out there with clients with.
They're always so good and they do not disappoint this year. I have to tell you, this is an interesting piece for us because I know so many of us first react as a human. I'm going to tell you right now that third trend, I'm like, oh, wow, I can see myself. I can see my behaviors in some of those spaces. But the real value of this for Accenture and for our clients is understanding how it affects our clients' business and how they connect with their customers. And it really does make an impact. It is something that every one of our clients should be asking around their leadership tables, around their customer interaction, their marketing strategies, their product strategies. Mark, tell us a little bit about how that comes to life and how our clients and any business that has to interact with a customer really needs to think about these trends.
Well, I think it starts with the fact that, there is a lot of change out there, a lot. This is a decade of change and people are feeling it. So understanding how they feel, that their whole experience of life feels and the way things that are changing around them affect their relationship with business and technology matters. And it matters in business because everything comes down to a basic principle. Businesses need people. They need employees to do the innovation, to design, to deliver, to service support, whatever it is they offer the world. And then they need customers to buy what they're selling. So we need to understand those employees and customers. And running a successful enterprise is only possible if you have that understanding, because that's how, if you understand how they're feeling and what they really think of what's happening in the world, you can be relevant to them and meet them where they are. And the best strategy is customer obsession, because without customers, there's no business. In fact, I'd say without employees and customers and the way they link together, there is no business.
Okay, so let's pick up on the employee side of that question. And Katie, I'll pop over to you. Let's talk about what learnings, how the trends and what we learn from the trends relate to employees, not only the employee experience, but also their relationship with work and therefore how they're going to relate to the customers of the business.
Yeah, I think that I laugh because I think humans, we don't see ourselves as an industry specific lens. We are one person, we are workers, we have a lot of roles that we play. And so, work is a big part of our lives, and the way that dignity and the respect that we look for day to day in work is something that's a purpose driver for a lot of people. But we're seeing just more and more kind of, when we talked about the transactional nature, this is manifesting in a few ways, whether it's just the techno stress of, a lot more technology getting between people as they talk to each other and try to work with each other. And a lot of times that's a good, in a good way, but sometimes it's not. You're looking at just the employee experience recession, which is just, the same way we talked about consumer love last year. Employees had that same expectation for a while economic times were good. And as that gets pulled back, they feel it. So it's an interesting angle because it's a tension that leaders have to figure out how to get right. And it's not like one step fits all. It's kind of something to manage and monitor and tweak different dials on it. But the stress around work and making sure people feel valued is one of the most critical parts of that trend. And it's more than just the technology you use. It's the humanization and humanity that work provides society.
So let me ask you one of my favorite questions that I do kind of as a standard question. And it's a little different as it applies to both of you, because I always ask what surprised you about this research. And you could imagine if you're doing a piece of industry research or technology-based research, you could go in with a pretty well-formed hypothesis. My gut says, and I've worked with the team on this for enough years to know, you really don't go in with that many hypotheses because you're truly seeking to understand. But at the end of the day, you do look back and go, I didn't see that one coming. What surprised you most in the trends this year? I'll start with you, Mark, and then let's go over to Katie.
Cost of hesitations. I was, once we understood what we saw and we understood how many aspects there are to it, how important it is to resolve, that grew very big in my head. And I think what I love most about this is it's a two-way thing. So there is a cost to me as a consumer if I'm hesitating. There is more friction in my life. And indeed, when I missed out on buying some concert tickets for Oasis recently because I refused to click on a link my daughter had sent me, there was actually a cost to me. And then there is a cost to our clients, which is if the marketing funnel gets 10% less effective at every stage of the funnel, then there is a literal cost for them on how do they pump that back out again and how do they deal with those lost customers. That's why I love that trend and didn't see it coming quite so clearly. Casey.
Yep. So mine was the impatience economy, and what I love about this one that surprised me is how people are finding relevancy up the funnel when it comes to the social channels. They're finding that connection to other people, whether it's like parasocial relationships or anything like that. But it's the way that we are having an affinity to content, to human content that's navigating very big life decisions. And that is totally having chain reaction impacts across big institutions. And one example I always give on this one is with self-diagnosis of mental health issues. We're seeing backlogs in the NHS of 2 to 3 years for ADHD diagnosis. You're seeing prescription drug shortages, and it's just knock-on affecting to the public services we have out there. And that's just the power of the crowd navigating people's lives in very big ways. It surprised me in a very positive way.
All right, and then my second favorite question, which is also a little different from the two of you, is normally what gave you hope? What made you optimistic or sometimes concerned? But in this case, I'm going to translate that into what's your favorite trend? Maybe for one of those two reasons, because it gave you great hope or it addressed a concern you have. This time I'm going to go in reverse order. Katie.
So I have a lot of favorite trends, but the parent trap actually was one of those that signals that humans aren't having to wrap our lives around technology, that we have more autonomy and control than we think. And I think the parent trap overall, when it comes to the protection of our kids, you're hitting on something deep within people to make sure you're wanting the best for this next generation. And that feels like a bit of the course correction that I've not seen happen before. So that's one that gives me a lot of hope. Mark, over to you.
Yeah, I love talking about social rewilding and the growing emphasis on bringing back physical and human connection. I think it's just ridiculous to suggest that digital is going away. Of course it isn't. It's just empowered us in so many interesting ways. This is actually just a rebalancing. And I, as somebody who cares a lot, for example, about sustainability, that rebalancing towards nature and towards other people, I think from a predominantly digital lifestyle, I think is super important and full of hope for us all.
All right. Well, a great piece of content. The whole concept here is 15 minutes so that people get a taste and want to dive in. And I think you guys have done a fantastic job of seeding the really interesting content that sits beneath these 5 trends and in life trends overall this year. Thank you for the work you do. And thanks for being with us today on Foresight in 15.
Thank you
so much.
Bye, everyone.